That's all you deserve. My father said those words while I was still holding my college diploma. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're new here, subscribe because what happened at my graduation was only the beginning of a family secret I never saw coming. My name is Nora, and for 4 years I had imagined what that moment would feel like. I thought my father would hug me. I thought my grandmother would cry. I thought maybe, for once, my family would look at me and see what I had accomplished instead of what they thought I lacked. I had worked for that diploma. There were nights when I studied until 2 in the morning, then woke up at 6 to get ready for work. There were semesters when I counted every dollar before buying groceries. I took weekend shifts, worked late nights, applied for scholarships, and swallowed my pride more times than I could remember. But that afternoon, standing beneath the bright summer sun in my black graduation gown, none of that seemed to matter. Because I had made it. The university courtyard was packed with families taking pictures, mothers crying, children running between chairs, and professors congratulating graduates. My grandmother, Ruth, stood near the edge of the crowd wearing the blue dress she had bought specifically for my graduation, smiling at me like she was proud enough for everyone. My father, Daniel, stood beside her, barely smiling. I told myself he was just tired. I had always made excuses for him. Whenever I accomplished something, he found a way to make it smaller. When I got my first scholarship, he said it wasn't like I had won $1 million. When I made the dean's list, he asked why I wasn't first in the class. When I got an internship, he reminded me that internships weren't real jobs. I kept telling myself maybe he wanted me to stay humble, maybe criticism would make me stronger, maybe one day he would finally say he was proud of me. That day I thought might be different. My diploma was in one hand and a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers was in the other. My grandmother had bought them, and after the ceremony she had hugged me and whispered, "Your mother would have been so proud." My mother had died when I was young, so most of my memories of her existed in fragments. Her perfume, her laugh, the sound of her humming while she cooked, and a photograph on my grandmother's mantle. My grandmother had always told me, "Your mother wanted you to have a good life." I never understood exactly what she meant. I thought it was simply something grieving families said. That afternoon I was too happy to ask. I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. Then my father reached into his jacket. At first I thought he was getting his phone, but instead he pulled out a small envelope. "Here," he said. I took it and asked, "What's this?" He said, "Your graduation gift." For one hopeful second my heart lifted. A gift from my father. Maybe this was finally the moment I had been waiting for. I opened the envelope and found 4 crisp $100 bills. I stared at them, then looked up at his face. There was no pride there. No happiness. Just a strange, cold satisfaction. "Dad," I started, but he leaned closer and said loud enough for the people around us to hear, "That's all you deserve." I thought I had misheard him. "What?" I whispered. He didn't repeat it quietly. He wanted me to hear it, and he wanted everyone else to hear it too. $400. That's all you deserve after everything we've done for you. My face burned. A professor walking past slowed down. 2 of my classmates stopped talking. Someone nearby lowered their phone. My grandmother's smile disappeared. I tried to laugh because sometimes embarrassment makes you do strange things, but my father didn't smile. "Dad, this isn't funny," I said. I wasn't joking. I looked down at the money in my hand. $400 suddenly felt heavier than my diploma. I wanted to give it back. I wanted to throw it onto the ground. I wanted to ask him why he had waited until the most important day of my life to humiliate me, but my throat had closed. My grandmother stepped forward. "Daniel." He looked at her. "What?" Her voice was different now. She wasn't confused anymore. She was angry. "What did you just say to her?" My father shrugged. "I said what I meant." My half-brother Evan was standing a few feet away watching everything. For one brief second our eyes met. I expected him to say something, anything, but he looked away. That hurt almost as much as my father's words. My grandmother reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. She looked at the $400, then at my father, and something changed in her expression. It wasn't just anger. It was recognition, like she had suddenly remembered something important, something she had forgotten for far too long. "Nora," she whispered. I told her I wasn't crying even though tears were already running down my face. She squeezed my hand and said, "You don't have to be ashamed." My father scoffed and told us not to turn it into something it wasn't. Then he grabbed his keys and told us to leave. The graduation ceremony was over. People were gathering their things, cars were starting, children were laughing, and someone nearby was taking pictures beneath the university banner. Life was moving forward while mine felt completely frozen. I looked at my diploma and thought about the 4 years of sacrifice, the late nights, the scholarships, the work shifts, the meals I had skipped, and every moment I had believed that if I worked hard enough, maybe I would finally earn my father's respect. My grandmother pulled me closer and whispered, "Come see me this weekend." I looked at her. "Why?" She glanced toward my father, then back at me. "Because there's something you need to know." I asked what it was, but she shook her head. "Not here." My father called for us to hurry. My grandmother didn't move immediately. She kept looking at me with an expression I couldn't understand. Then she squeezed my hand once and finally let go. I watched her walk toward my father, still holding the $400. I had no idea those 4 bills were about to lead me to a truth worth far more than money. A truth about my mother, my father, and the life I had spent 4 years struggling to build. At that moment, all I knew was that my graduation day had ended with 6 words I would never forget. "That's all you deserve." I just didn't know yet how wrong he was. The parking lot slowly emptied as families hugged their graduates goodbye, car doors slammed, and the bright celebration of the afternoon began disappearing into the ordinary noise of people heading home. I was still standing there with the $400 in my hand when my grandmother reached for my arm and gently pulled me away from my father. "Nora, wait." There was something in her voice that made me stop. Her hands were shaking, but it wasn't because of her age. I could see the anger in the way her fingers tightened around my wrist. She looked at the money, then at me, and whispered, "This isn't about $400. I tried to smile through my tears. "Grandma, please. I just want to go home." She shook her head. "No. You need to listen to me." I had never heard her sound like that before. She glanced toward my father, who was standing several yards away, impatiently checking his phone. "Your father shouldn't have done that to you," she said. "And I should have told you something a long time ago." My stomach tightened. "Told me what?" She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, she looked away as if she was fighting with herself. "I thought everything was taken care of," she finally said. "I trusted him." I didn't understand. Trusted Dad with what? She shook her head again. "Not here. Not today." Her eyes filled with tears, and that scared me more than anything my father had said. My grandmother had always been the calm one. She was the person who could walk into an argument and make everyone lower their voices. But now she looked frightened. "Come to my house this weekend," she whispered. "Alone. Don't tell your father. Don't bring Evan. Just you." I stared at her. "Grandma, you're making me nervous." He squeezed my hand. "Good. You need to be nervous enough to finally ask questions." Before I could ask another word, my father's voice cut across the parking lot. "Mom. Nora. Come on. We're leaving." My grandmother looked toward him, then back at me. For 1 second neither of us spoke. Then she squeezed my hand once, hard enough for me to feel the message behind it. This wasn't over. She let go and walked toward my father, leaving me standing there with my diploma under one arm and $400 in the other. I watched her get into the car, wondering what she had been hiding from me all these years. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the insult my father had given me. I was wondering what he had taken from me. That weekend I drove to my grandmother's house alone, just like she had asked. I spent the entire drive wondering what she could possibly know that my father had kept from me. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already waiting by the window. She opened the door before I even knocked, and the moment I saw her face, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "Come in, Nora," she said quietly. I followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee usually made me feel safe. That morning everything felt different. She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't ask about graduation. Instead, she walked to an old cabinet, reached behind a stack of dishes, and pulled out a small metal box covered in scratches. She placed it on the kitchen table and sat across from me. "Your mother gave me this before she died," she said. My heart stopped for a second. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. She opened the box and removed several folded documents, all yellowed slightly with age. Then she slid them toward me. "Because she wanted you protected." I looked down at the papers without understanding. My grandmother pointed to a name I recognized. My mother's. Then she said something that completely changed the way I remembered my childhood. Your mother created a trust for you. I stared at her. A trust. She nodded. Money set aside for your education and your future. It was supposed to be protected until you became an adult. I laughed nervously because none of this made sense. Grandma, I didn't have a trust. Dad always said there wasn't enough money. That's why I worked during college. Her expression tightened. That's what he told you. I nodded. She looked down at the documents. I thought he had been using it for you. I thought your tuition, your books, your expenses, everything was coming from that account. My mouth went dry. She explained that after my mother died, my father became the trustee. He was responsible for managing the money until I reached adulthood. According to my grandmother, the trust had been substantial enough to cover my entire college education and still leave money for my future. I suddenly remembered every night I had worked until exhaustion, every scholarship application, every time I had told myself I couldn't afford something. My grandmother reached across the table and touched my hand. Nora, if what I think happened is true, your father didn't just fail to help you. She paused. He may have taken the money that was meant for you. I stared at the documents, realizing the $400 from graduation might not have been a gift at all. It might have been the smallest amount my father ever gave me. I drove home from my grandmother's house with copies of the documents sitting on the passenger seat, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them again. Every few minutes my mind returned to the same question. If my mother had really left money for my education, then why had I spent 4 years working myself exhausted just to stay enrolled? By the time I reached my apartment, I felt like I was walking through someone else's life. I pulled an old shoebox from the back of my closet, the one where I had kept everything I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Report cards, scholarship letters, financial aid forms, old birthday cards and photographs. I spread everything across my kitchen table. Then I found a birthday card from my grandmother that I had received when I turned 18. Inside, beneath a simple birthday message she had written, "Your mother would be smiling today. Never forget the gift she left you." I stared at that sentence for several minutes. At 18 I had assumed she meant memories. Now it felt like a warning I had completely missed. I called my closest friend, Marcus, who worked in finance and understood documents far better than I did. When I showed him the trust papers and my old financial aid records, his expression changed. "Nora, look at this." He pointed to my financial aid applications. They showed my income, scholarships, and reported assets, but there was no mention of a trust account. "Shouldn't this have been listed?" I asked. Marcus shook his head carefully. "It depends on how the trust was structured, but if your father controlled an account intended for your education and it was being used for something else, you need actual records before you accuse anyone." His words made my stomach twist. I wanted to call my father immediately. I wanted to demand an explanation. But Marcus stopped me. "Don't confront him yet. If he knows you're investigating, anything missing from the records could become much harder to prove." So instead we started gathering everything. We organized my mother's documents, my grandmother's papers, my college records, and every financial statement I could legally obtain. Then we submitted formal requests for the bank and court records connected to the trust. After I clicked the final confirmation, I sat staring at the screen with trembling hands. For the first time, I wasn't simply wondering whether my father had lied to me. I was waiting to find out exactly how much of my life had been built on that lie. A few days later, I went to my father's house pretending everything was normal. I told myself I wasn't there to accuse him. I wasn't there to start a fight. I simply wanted to look him in the eyes and see what happened when I mentioned my mother's name. My father was sitting in the living room watching television while my stepmother, Claire, was sorting mail at the kitchen counter. Evan was upstairs. For a few minutes we talked about ordinary things. My graduation work, the weather. My father even asked whether I had spent the $400 yet. I forced a small smile. "Not yet." He nodded as if the matter was settled. Then I quietly said, "Grandma showed me some of Mom's old documents." His entire expression changed. It was so fast that another person might have missed it, but I didn't. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes narrowed. "What documents?" I shrugged. "Just some things she kept." He put the remote down. "Why are you digging through old stuff?" "I'm not digging," I said. "I was just curious." My stepmother suddenly stopped sorting the mail. "Nora, Your mother has been gone for years. Maybe it's better to leave the past alone. I looked at her. Why? Neither of them answered. My father stood up. Because I've done everything for you. I paid bills. I kept a roof over your head. I made sacrifices you clearly don't appreciate. I felt something inside me harden. Did Mom leave anything for me? The room went completely silent. My father's face went pale for half a second before anger replaced it. Who told you that? He demanded. So there was something? I asked. You're being ungrateful, he snapped. After everything I've done, this is how you repay me? Claire immediately stepped beside him. Your father raised you. You should be thanking him instead of questioning him. I looked toward the staircase. Evan had appeared at the top, silently listening. He wouldn't look at me. I didn't push further. I simply picked up my bag and walked outside. Sitting in my car, I finally let myself breathe. I had gone there looking for an answer, but my father's reaction had given me something more important. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was confirmation that I had found the one subject he desperately didn't want me to discuss. The next morning, I called my grandmother and told her exactly what had happened at my father's house. She didn't sound surprised. Instead, she gave me the name of an attorney she trusted, a woman named Helen who specialized in trusts and estates. I brought every document I had, the papers from my grandmother's metal box, my financial aid records, old letters, and the information we'd requested from the bank. Helen studied everything silently for several minutes. Then she looked at me and said, Nora, don't confront your father again. Let the records speak. She explained that if my father had been appointed trustee of a trust created for me, he had legal duties to manage those funds for my benefit. Using the money for unrelated personal expenses could potentially amount to serious misconduct, depending on the trust terms and applicable law. Hearing that made the betrayal feel real in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't simply my father being cruel. If the documents proved what we suspected, he had been responsible for protecting something my mother had deliberately left for me. Helen began preparing formal requests for the complete trust history, including account statements, distributions, transfers, and any records showing where the money had gone. While we waited, my grandmother told me something else. She remembered the amount my mother had originally placed into the trust. It had been enough to cover my college education, living expenses, and still leave a substantial amount for my future. I thought about the years I had spent working nights, skipping meals, and worrying over tuition payments. My eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. My grandmother lowered her head. Because I trusted your father. I thought he was doing what your mother wanted. She wiped her eyes and whispered, I'm sorry. I reached across the table and held her hand. I knew she hadn't stolen anything from me. But somehow her apology hurt almost as much as my father's betrayal. Before I left, Helen called with one final warning. Once we pull these records and start making formal demands, you can't go back to pretending this is just a family disagreement. I nodded. I already knew. Whatever was hiding inside those records was about to change all of us. The records arrived 3 days later, and Helen asked me to come to her office before she opened them. I knew from her expression that whatever was inside wasn't going to be easy. She placed a thick folder on the desk and slowly pushed it toward me. Nora, I want you to prepare yourself. My hands were already cold. I opened the first statement. The trust had once contained far more money than I had ever imagined. Then I saw the withdrawals, one after another. Thousands of dollars disappearing over the years. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then Helen began explaining the descriptions attached to the transactions. Mortgage payments, family vacations, private school tuition for Evan, household expenses, a luxury car. None of it had anything to do with my education or my future. I turned another page. Another withdrawal. Then another. My eyes blurred. How much is left? Finally asked. Helen paused before answering. Very little. I stared at her. But this was supposed to be for me. She nodded. That's what the trust documents indicate. I thought about every time my father had told me there wasn't enough money for something. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table filling out scholarship applications. I remembered working late shifts while other students went home. I remembered eating cheap noodles for dinner because I couldn't afford anything else. And all that time, money intended for my future had apparently been paying for someone else's life. The hardest part was seeing Evan's name repeatedly. His private school tuition. His expenses. Things I had never been offered. I wasn't angry at him. Not yet. I was simply devastated by what those records meant. My grandmother cried when I showed her the statements. I should have known, she whispered. I should have checked. I shook my head. You trusted him. She looked at me through tears. I trusted my son. That sentence stayed with me. Because my father had spent years telling me I wasn't entitled to anything. Yet the records showed that something had been mine all along. Helen closed the folder and said, now we have a choice. We can quietly pursue restitution, or we can force him to answer for every dollar. I looked at the folder one more time. I don't want revenge, I said. I want the truth. And for the first time I knew I was ready to make my father face it. Helen and I spent the next few days building a legal strategy. She prepared a formal demand letter listing the questionable withdrawals, the amount that remained recoverable, and the documents supporting my claim. If my father refused to cooperate, the next step would be a lawsuit. I understood why the legal process mattered, but there was something I couldn't shake. I didn't want my father to simply write a check and make the entire thing disappear behind closed doors. For years he had made me feel like I was asking for too much whenever I needed anything. I wanted him to finally hear the truth from me. I wanted the family to know what had happened. So I asked my grandmother for one more favor. Would you have everyone over for dinner? He immediately understood. You want to tell them? I nodded. I want Dad to answer the questions himself. My grandmother agreed to host the dinner at her house. She told my father it was simply a small family gathering to celebrate my graduation properly since everything had been so rushed that day. He agreed without suspicion. My stepmother, Claire, confirmed they would come and Evan said he would be there too. Meanwhile, Marcus helped me organize the records. We separated the statements by year and marked the withdrawals that clearly had nothing to do with my education. There were pages of them. I printed copies of everything and placed them inside labeled folders. I didn't want anyone to accuse me of exaggerating. Every number would be there. Every date. Every transaction. The night before the dinner, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen arranging plates and glasses around the table. She watched me quietly. Are you sure? She asked. I looked at the empty chair where my father would sit. No, I admitted. But I'm done being afraid. She reached over and squeezed my shoulder. I took one final look at the folders sitting beside me. The $400 from graduation was still in my wallet. I had kept it untouched. Tomorrow my father would finally learn that the little envelope he had used to humiliate me had opened a door he desperately wanted to keep closed. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to insult him. I was simply going to put the truth on the table and let the documents speak for themselves. By 7 that evening, everyone was seated around my grandmother's dining table. At first the dinner felt almost normal. My father joked about the food. Claire talked about Evan's plans. Evan barely touched his plate. My grandmother kept looking at me waiting. I said almost nothing. I wanted my father comfortable. I wanted him to believe this was exactly what he thought it was. A simple graduation dinner. After dessert was served, I stood up and picked up the first folder. Dad, there's something we need to talk about. His smile disappeared. I placed the documents on the table. These are the records from Mom's trust. My father's face changed instantly. Claire looked at him. What trust? I opened the folder and began laying out the statements. The trust Mom created for me. The one you were supposed to manage. My father pushed his chair back. Who gave you these? The bank records did. I pointed to the first page. This withdrawal was for the mortgage. This one was for a family vacation. This one paid Evan's private school tuition. And this one helped purchase your car. Nobody spoke. Claire's face slowly lost its color. Daniel, she whispered. My father immediately started defending himself. He said the money had been used for the family, that I had been a child and didn't understand what it cost to raise me. I reminded him that the trust was specifically created for my education and future. He accused me of being ungrateful. I asked him why I had worked throughout college if he had access to money meant for my education. He had no answer. Then my grandmother began crying. She looked at her son and said, I trusted you. My father snapped that he had done what he had to do. Evan finally spoke. Dad, did you really use my school money? My father turned toward him but couldn't answer. Evan looked at me, his voice shaking. Nora, I'm sorry. I didn't know. That apology broke something inside me. My father stood up, knocked his chair backward and said we were all against him. Then he walked out. The door slammed behind him. Nobody moved. For years I had imagined confronting him. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead I felt strangely empty. My grandmother reached across the table and held my hand. This time neither of us said a word. The legal battle never reached the courtroom. After reviewing the records, my father's attorney advised him to settle rather than risk a public trial. The agreement required him to repay a significant portion of the money that could still be recovered, secured through a lien on his assets. It wasn't everything my mother had left for me, and no settlement could return the years I had spent believing I wasn't worthy of help. But for the first time the truth was officially acknowledged. My grandmother also made a decision that left me speechless. She signed over the deed to her house to me, telling me it wasn't payment for what my father had done. It was her way of making sure I always had somewhere safe to stand. With part of the settlement, I finally enrolled in the graduate program I had abandoned because I couldn't afford it. This time I didn't need to work 3 jobs just to stay enrolled. Evan and I slowly rebuilt our relationship, now that neither of us had to pretend our father's choices were normal. Months later, I framed the original $400 bill from graduation and hung it above my desk. I didn't frame it because I valued what my father had given me. I framed it because of what it represented. He had looked at me that day and said, "That's all you deserve." He had been wrong. I had deserved the truth. I had deserved the opportunity my mother had left for me. And most importantly, I had finally learned that my worth was never determined by what my father was willing to give me. One question before you leave. Would you have taken the money, exposed the truth, or walked away? Subscribe for the next story and tell me what you would have done.